Hey Critical Analysis, this is your video specifically for Chapter 5 vocabulary. So we're in week 4 already, so we're getting halfway through. I'm going to be going to the fill in section and of course your study guide. You open it up and you get your blank guide right here. And then I have my completed guide, which I will use as I go through and discuss the meanings. So we only have one set of vocabulary words this week because it is the halfway point, and because next week you will have your chapter 1 through 5 vocabulary test. So we're kind of pausing on new vocabulary for right now so that you can kind of think about all of the vocabulary from chapters 1 through this point. And then next week we will have a video that does go over your chapter 1 through 5 vocabulary. So you're also going to have chapter 6 vocabulary at the same time, and I'll talk about how that's going to kind of work. So just one vocabulary video and one vocabulary chapter for this week. All right, so your vocabulary comes from the 3 different readings of our chapter. So depending on when you're watching this, whether you've watched the assignment video first and now you're coming here or vice versa, just know that in your chapter 5 text, there are 3 selections. There's a psychology selection, and it talks about this obedience study. I think this is actually a really interesting reading. It talks about like this psychological study that was done years ago and how it can be replicated and how like it's kind of like human behavior. We have a selection 2. Give it a second to load. There we go. Selection 2 is about autism and like how autism has been viewed, and a little story about a young child with autism. And then selection 3, criminal justice, it's talking about math and algorithms and how they're using that to kind of fight crime. So this is where the vocabulary is coming from a little bit from each reading. Your chapter 5 text and skill sheet, as you have seen or will see in the chapter 5 assignment video, also has you reading these selections. So at some point you're going to need to read all 3 selections for vocabulary and your assignment video purposes this week. All right, so let's go ahead and jump in. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at ominously down to subverted. Those are coming from selection number 1. All right, so let's look at our first word here. If you've ever heard of something being ominous, like ominously, it means something bad is going to happen. If you have like an omen, a bad omen, ominous means that it just feels like something bad is on its way, something unpleasant, unlucky. So that is not a great feeling to have or a great way to describe something. Compliance means you're able to follow directions, and usually that's a positive thing, right? Being compliant, you're able to obey, maybe whether it's like an employer, a parent, a teacher, whatever that is, whatever stage of life you're in. If you're compliant, you're able to follow directions. And sometimes they'll use this in business, like are you compliant with certain standards or practices? Anguished means that you have some pain and suffering going on. It could be physical. You have a physical ailment, it's causing you some anguish, or it could be mental, emotional, something that's causing you some pain, so to feel anguish. Narcissism, if someone you know is a narcissist, it's an actual personality disorder, but sometimes people can just kind of display the qualities without having the full disorder. It's if you're very self-absorbed or you admire yourself very much, like you're very in love with yourself, you can do no wrong, you're whatever it is you feel to be like all positive traits. So a lot of self-absorption. Replications means duplicates or copies. So if you're trying to replicate something, you're trying to copy it, you're trying to make more of something. Paper, for instance, you try to make copies of paper, or in this case, because of the study, it's talking about replicating the study to copy the study. And then subverted is when you're trying to undermine power. So if you're not happy with leadership positions, maybe a group of people kind of like come up with a plan to maybe get that person removed. You're like undermining power or authority. All right, the next set of words from rabid to ample, in this next page there, are going to come from selection 2 on the autism. So rabid, now a lot of people often think of like rabid rabies, like that kind of thing. That's not what we're talking about right now. It means like extremely interested. If you have a rabid interest in something, you are really into it. So like one of my children is really into dinosaurs. Like he's a rabid interest in it. So it's extreme interest. Bellowing is like a deep shout. If someone bellows, it's like a very deep yell or a shout that obviously like trying to get your attention, or maybe they're calling out in maybe pain, but a bellow is a deep shout. Transfixed is when you're very memorized by something. So let's say there's something going on. I had someone in my spring semester kind of take a morbid twist to it. She goes, it's like when you're driving on the highway and there is a car accident and you can't stop looking away. You're like transfixed. Yeah, kind of. Like you're mesmerized, you're astonished. You don't want to look away from it. It really captures your attention. Savvy, you know how to do something really well. So this oftentimes is combined with like tech savviness. But it doesn't have to be technologically related. So savviness or savvy is just knowing how to do something well. You can be savvy in a subject area. You can be savvy with a particular hobby. It's just when you know what to do really well with something. Looking on the next page here, furrowed, I often think of like a furrowed brow. Maybe you're kind of like wrinkling your brow or you're raising your eyebrows. It's kind of showing that you're maybe confused or you're thinking deep about something or maybe you're surprised. So furrowed is like to raise or wrinkle. A vestibule is a hall or lobby. In the selection, you're going to read about this child who really enjoys trains. And so they talk about like the vestibule, a lobby, or an area in the train that's like a little small hall area. But if you walk into like a doctor's office, for instance, like technically when you walk in their waiting room, that could also be called a vestibule. So it's a hall or a lobby. And then finally, ample just means plenty of something. If you have an ample amount of something, you have a lot of it. Probably would not be a great thing to have an ample amount of stress. It would be a fantastic thing to have an ample amount of money. So it could go, both positive and negative. All right, and then this last set down from algorithm to anthropology is the story on like the crime and using math to solve gang fighting and crimes. So algorithm is a step-by-step formula for achieving desired results. That's like very formulaic. But you use algorithms in math. You use algorithms when you talk about, computer processes and things like that, problem solving with computers. So it's a step-by-step, like here's how we're going to walk through this problem. We're going to follow these steps, follow this formula, follow this algorithm. Simulated means to imitate conditions. So oftentimes, if you're going into like flight school, before you can ever become a pilot, you have to do lots of hours training, and part of that is simulated flights where you're sitting in an area and they imitate these conditions of flying a plane. You're not actually flying a plane. This is kind of like virtual reality type thing. They're imitating conditions. They're creating conditions to look real, even though they're not. Mimic means to copy. So if you're mimicking someone, maybe with your voice or your actions, you are copying what they're saying or doing. If you have siblings or, close cousins or nieces, nephews, if you've ever seen children interact, they do a lot of this. So mimicking is to copy. It's not always the most pleasant thing to do or to be the recipient of. Perpetrator is someone who commits a crime. So if someone is considered a perpetrator, they are being looked at as possibly someone who has done that crime. Hackers are those who try to steal information, typically through like computer, databases, systems, things like that, but they are trying to gain the information illegally. Rivalries or competition. They don't get along. Here in Northeast Ohio, we have a lot of these with football. It's a lot of rivals here in the area. So it could be something like sports. It could be something that has to do with different, organizations, people who just kind of go up against each other. In this article, they talk about like gang rivalries. And then anthropology is the study of humans. So studying like human behavior, studying past cultures, all goes into that wrap up of anthropology. Okay, so those are your chapter 5 vocabulary words. Please make sure you read selections 1, 2, and 3, not only to see how these words are embedded in the context, but also then you'll use them for your chapter 5 assignment. All right, see you next video.